Karen stole my packages. Too bad I'm the postal inspector. Karen from the HOA board has been stealing packages from my doorstep for months, thinking she's untouchable because she controls the neighborhood rules. She even had the nerve to fine me for creating clutter when I complained about missing deliveries. What she doesn't know is that I'm a federal postal inspector and mail theft is about to become her biggest mistake. The look on her face when the handcuffs clicked. Priceless. You live in Willowbrook Commons, a modest suburban development where you moved 2 years ago seeking peace after decades working as a United States postal inspector. At 52, you've earned your quiet retirement home, a small ranch house with a wraparound porch where packages get delivered daily. You've seen every mail crime imaginable, from identity theft rings to major fraud operations. But you never expected to encounter federal crimes in your own neighborhood. Your house sits at the end of Maple Lane, where the mail truck makes its final stop each afternoon around 3 p.m. You've always been the model neighbor, keeping your lawn trimmed, your mailbox pristine, and your packages neatly arranged when you're not home to receive them. What you didn't anticipate was living next door to Karen Pemberton, the self-appointed HOA enforcement officer who treats the neighborhood rules like her personal kingdom. Karen lives in the largest house on the street, complete with perfectly manicured gardens and security cameras that seem to point in every direction except her own property. She's been the HOA board secretary for 8 years, and everyone knows she has dreams of becoming president. Her husband works long hours as a traveling salesman, leaving Karen plenty of time to patrol the neighborhood looking for violations and inserting herself into everyone's business. The first few months were peaceful enough. You exchanged polite waves with neighbors, attended one awkward HOA meeting, and settled into retirement life. You even complimented Karen on her rose bushes, thinking a friendly relationship with the HOA board might prevent future headaches. But then your online shopping habits became her obsession. You ordered supplies for your woodworking hobby, sandpaper, stain, small tools that arrived in brown boxes almost daily. You bought gifts for your grandchildren who lived across the country. You even ordered groceries online when your knee acted up from an old injury. These deliveries were normal, reasonable, and completely within your rights as a homeowner. But Karen saw them as a personal affront to her vision of neighborhood perfection. She would walk past your house twice a day during her community inspections, always carrying that clipboard and taking notes. Sometimes she'd stop and photograph your porch, claiming it was for HOA documentation purposes. You started to notice her timing coincided perfectly with package deliveries, like she was monitoring your mail schedule. The other neighbors warned you about Karen's reputation. Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down had been fined for painting her shutters the wrong shade of blue. The Johnsons got written up for parking their work truck in their own driveway. Even the elderly Morrison couple received citations for having excessive garden gnomes in their backyard. But you figured if you kept a low profile and followed the actual HOA rules, you'd avoid Karen's attention. You couldn't have been more wrong, because Karen wasn't interested in enforcing legitimate rules. She was interested in control. And your packages represented something she couldn't control yet. It started innocently enough when Karen knocked on your door one Tuesday evening in late September, holding a clipboard and wearing her official HOA badge like a sheriff's star. The badge read Community Standards Enforcement in bold letters, though you'd never seen anything like it mentioned in the HOA bylaws. "I've been monitoring the delivery situation on Maple Lane," she announced without even saying hello. "And your packages are creating an eyesore that violates Section 4.7 of our community standards." You stared at her, genuinely confused. "What packages?" "They're usually gone within hours of delivery." Exactly the problem, Karen sniffed, flipping through papers on her clipboard like a prosecutor building a case. The UPS truck, the FedEx truck, Amazon delivery. It's constant traffic that disrupts our peaceful community. Plus, when packages sit on doorsteps, It makes the whole neighborhood look like a distribution center instead of a residential area. She handed you an official-looking HOA notice printed on letterhead you'd never seen before. The document demanded that you reduce package deliveries to no more than 2 per week and install a community-approved package receptacle within 30 days. The fine for non-compliance: $250 per violation. With each delivery counting as a separate offense, you kept your voice calm, drawing on decades of experience dealing with unreasonable people in your law enforcement career. Karen, I'm not sure the HOA can legally regulate how often residents receive mail or packages. That might actually violate federal postal regulations. Her eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you questioning the authority of this board? Because I can assure you we have full legal backing for our community standards. Maybe you should have read the HOA agreement more carefully before you moved here. She pointed to a clause in her fake document about maintaining community, aesthetics, and preventing commercial level activity in residential zones. It all sounded official, but something felt wrong about the whole interaction. Karen was too aggressive, too prepared. Like she'd been planning this confrontation for weeks. I'll need to review this with the full HOA board, you said diplomatically. I am the HOA enforcement authority, Karen shot back. The board has given me complete discretion over community standards violations. You have 30 days to comply, or the fines start accumulating daily. That night, you pulled out your HOA paperwork and read every single page with the careful attention you'd once given to federal case files. No, where did it mention package delivery restrictions or mandatory receptacles? In fact, the agreement specifically stated that residents had the right to receive mail and packages without interference, as guaranteed by Federal Postal Service regulations. Karen was making up rules as she went along, but why? What did she gain from harassing you about packages? You'd dealt with enough criminals to recognize when someone had ulterior motives, but you couldn't figure out Karen's angle yet. You decided to test her claims by calling the HOA president, Margaret Walsh, a pleasant woman in her 70s who'd welcomed you to the neighborhood. Margaret sounded genuinely confused when you described Karen's visit. Package delivery restrictions. Margaret repeated, "We've never discussed anything like that in board meetings, and I've certainly never authorized Karen to create new rules on her own. She's supposed to report violations, not invent them, but then things got worse. 3 weeks later, your packages started disappearing. At first, you thought it was just delivery mistakes. Maybe the driver left them at the wrong address or marked them delivered prematurely. But when you checked the tracking information, everything showed delivered with timestamps and photos of packages sitting clearly on your porch. You called UPS, FedEx, and Amazon multiple times, but their records showed successful deliveries with photographic proof. The drivers insisted they'd left packages exactly where they were supposed to. Yet somehow, between the time they took those photos and the time you got home from your daily walks, the packages vanished into thin air. The missing items weren't random either. Your woodworking supplies disappeared. A birthday gift for your granddaughter vanished. Even a package containing prescription medication for your blood pressure went missing, which elevated the situation from annoying to genuinely concerning. That's when you decided to install a simple doorbell camera. Nothing fancy. Just a basic security device that would help you figure out what was happening to your deliveries. You'd investigated enough crimes to know that evidence was everything, and you needed to see exactly what was going on. The truth, when it emerged, was more shocking than anything you'd encountered in 30 years of federal law enforcement. Karen wasn't just complaining about your packages, she was stealing them. The footage showed her walking casually up your driveway around 4 p.m. each day, checking to see if anyone was watching. Then, simply picking up whatever had been delivered and walking back to her house like she owned the place. For 2 weeks, you watched in disbelief as Karen stole everything from vitamin supplements to Christmas decorations you'd ordered early. She had a system. She'd wait until most neighbors were inside preparing dinner, then make her rounds collecting packages from your porch. Sometimes she'd even wave at passing cars, acting like she was helping a neighbor buy. Securing their deliveries. The most outrageous theft happened on a Thursday afternoon when Karen took a package containing prescription medication clearly labeled with pharmacy warnings. This wasn't just theft anymore, it was mail fraud involving controlled substances, a federal felony that carried serious prison time. You'd seen enough. The next day, you confronted Karen with printed screenshots from your security camera. The evidence was undeniable. 17 separate instances of her taking packages from your property. Karen's response was breathtaking in its audacity. "I was protecting those packages from theft," she claimed without even blinking. "Leaving them on porches is irresponsible and violates our community security standards. I've been holding them in safekeeping until you install a proper receptacle and comply with HOA regulations. Where are my packages now?" You demanded, trying to keep your voice level despite the rage building inside you. "I'll return them once you pay the accumulated fines and install an approved package box," Karen replied smoothly, pulling out another clipboard covered in fake violations. "You know, $1,250 for 17 delivery violations at $75 each, plus late fees." That's when you realized Karen had created an elaborate criminal enterprise. She was stealing packages to force compliance with fake rules, then holding them hostage for ransom disguised as HOA fines. She probably thought a quiet retiree would just pay up rather than fight back against someone who claimed HOA. Authority.Karen had no idea she'd just confessed to federal mail theft in front of a United States Postal Inspector. She was about to learn the hard way that some neighbors are more dangerous than they appear. The next morning, you made a phone call that Karen never saw coming. Your hands were steady as you dialed a number you knew by heart. The same number you'd called thousands of times during your law enforcement career. "This is Inspector Johnson calling in an active mail theft investigation," you told your former supervisor at the Postal Inspection Service. "I need to request official involvement in a case occurring at my home address." The conversation that followed was surreal. Here you were, supposedly retired, reporting crimes being committed against you by your own neighbor. But federal mail theft was federal mail theft, regardless of who the victim was or where it happened. Within hours, you had authorization to conduct a federal investigation into mail theft, mail fraud, and extortion using the postal system. Your retirement hadn't officially started yet. You were still on extended leave, following a back injury, which meant you retained full authority to investigate postal crimes. You spent the weekend building an airtight case with the methodical precision that had made you one of the most successful postal inspectors in the district. The doorbell camera footage provided clear, time-stamped evidence of theft. You documented each missing package with tracking numbers, delivery confirmations, and retail values. But the investigation revealed something much bigger than simple package theft. You discovered that Karen had been running this scam on 3 other neighbors who had simply paid her fake fines rather than fight back. Mrs. Chen had paid $400. The young couple on Oak Street had handed over $600. Even elderly Mr. Morrison had been intimidated into paying $250 for excessive garden deliveries. Bank records, which you accessed through proper federal channels, showed Karen had been depositing these HOA fines into her personal account rather than any official association funds. She'd collected over $3,000 in the past 6 months through this scheme, targeting residents who seemed least likely to challenge her authority. Most damning of all, you found evidence that Karen had been selling some of the stolen merchandise online. Your missing woodworking tools appeared on several auction sites under her husband's name. The prescription medication theft elevated everything to federal mail fraud involving controlled substances. On Monday morning, you walked over to Karen's house wearing your official postal inspector jacket and badge, carrying a briefcase full of evidence and federal warrants. You'd done this walk thousands of times during your career, but never in your own neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on you. You knocked on Karen's door with the confidence of someone who had conducted thousands of these confrontations. When she opened it, Karen immediately went pale seeing your uniform and badge. For the first time since you'd known her, Karen Pemberton was speechless. "What's this about?" She finally stammered, her usual commanding tone replaced by obvious fear. "Mrs. Pemberton, I'm Inspector Johnson with the United States Postal Inspection Service," you said in your official voice, the same tone that had intimidated countless criminals over 3 decades. "I'm here to discuss the theft of mail and packages from 47 Maple Lane, which constitutes federal mail theft under Title 18. Section 1708 of the United States Code." The clipboard that had been her weapon of choice for so many months fell from Karen's trembling hands as the reality hit her like a freight train. Her quiet neighbor wasn't just some pushover retiree. He was a federal law enforcement officer with 30 years of experience. And she had been committing felonies right in front of him for months. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Karen whispered, but you could see the panic spreading across her face as she realized the magnitude of her situation. The woman who had terrorized an entire neighborhood with fake authority was about to face real federal justice. "Mrs. Pemberton, I have video evidence of you removing mail and packages from 47 Maple Lane on 17 separate occasions between September 15th and October 28th. You continued, opening your briefcase to reveal the documentation that would destroy her life. "I also have evidence that you've been operating a fraudulent scheme using fake HOA violations to extort money from neighbors." Karen's legs nearly gave out as you laid photograph after photograph on her porch table, clear images from your security camera showing her stealing packages, time-stamped and dated. Her face appeared clearly in every shot, making denial impossible. "But I'm on the HOA board," Karen protested desperately. "I have authority to enforce community standards and protect residents from theft." "Ma'am, no HOA in America has the authority to steal federal mail or create fake fines for personal profit," you replied with the patience of someone who had explained federal law to countless criminals. "What you've done constitutes mail theft, mail fraud, and extortion using the postal system. These are federal felonies punishable by up to 5 years in federal prison per offense." You pulled out the search warrant that had been expedited through federal court. "I'm authorized to search your premises for stolen mail and packages. You can cooperate now and make this easy. Or I can call for backup, and we can do this the difficult way with multiple agents and neighbors watching from their windows." The mention of neighbors watching seemed to break Karen's last bit of resistance. Her entire identity was built around being the respected HOA authority figure. The thought of being publicly exposed as a criminal in front of the community she'd controlled was devastating. Karen led you to her garage with the defeated walk of someone whose world was collapsing. What you found there exceeded even your experienced expectations. She had built an elaborate storage system containing dozens of stolen packages, not just yours, but packages belonging to half the neighborhood. Some packages had been opened and the contents sorted into bins marked resale, personal use, and return. Others remained sealed, waiting for Karen to decide their fate. She had been operating like a one-woman mail theft ring, convinced her HOA position gave her immunity from consequences. "Why?" you asked as you photographed the evidence, though you'd heard similar sob stories from hundreds of criminals over the years. Karen broke down completely, her carefully constructed persona crumbling into tears and desperation. "I needed the money," she sobbed. "My husband lost his job 8 months ago when his company downsized. I've been using the HOA fines to pay our mortgage and car payments. I thought if I could just control the package situation, make everyone follow proper procedures, Maybe I could collect enough fines to keep us afloat until he found work. So you decided to steal federal mail and extort your neighbors instead of getting a job or asking for help? You asked, continuing to document the crime scene with professional detachment. It wasn't supposed to be stealing. Karen insisted through her tears. I was going to return everything once people paid their fines and followed the rules. I was trying to create order in this neighborhood. Within an hour, Karen was in handcuffs as federal agents arrived to process the crime scene. The sight of postal inspectors loading evidence boxes while Karen sat in the back of an unmarked government car drew every neighbor out of their houses. The woman who had terrorized them with clipboards and fake violations was being led away by real federal agents with real badges and real authority. Mrs. Chen stood on her porch with tears of relief in her eyes. The young couple from Oak Street held hands as they watched justice finally arrive on Maple Lane. Even Mr. Morrison, despite his age, came outside to witness the end of Karen's reign of terror. As the car drove away with Karen in custody, you realize that sometimes the best neighborhood watch program is simply having the right neighbor in the right place at the right time. #. Chapter 6. The HOA board crumbles and justice prevails. News of Karen's arrest spread through Willowbrook Commons faster than gossip at a church social. Within hours, every resident knew that their most feared HOA board member had been running a federal mail theft operation right under their noses. The woman who had made their lives miserable with fake fines and imaginary violations was facing real prison time for real crimes. The revelation sent shockwaves through the community that extended far beyond Karen's immediate victims. Residents began questioning every fine they'd paid, every rule they'd followed, every time they'd been intimidated by Karen's clipboard and badge. How much of their HOA's authority had been completely fabricated? Margaret Walsh, the actual HOA president, called an emergency board meeting for that Thursday evening. The community center hadn't been so packed since the heated debate over pool hours 3 years earlier. This time, however, the energy was different. Residents came seeking answers and justice, not compromise. We had no knowledge of Karen's criminal activities, Margaret announced to the crowded room. Though several residents immediately challenged that claim. How could fake fines be collected without board oversight? How could violations be issued that weren't in the actual bylaws? How could one person terrorize an entire neighborhood without anyone in leadership noticing? The questions came fast and angry. Mrs. Chen stood up with her receipts showing $400 in payments for violations that never existed. The young couple from Oak Street demanded to know why their complaints about Karen's harassment had been ignored. Mr. Morrison, usually quiet at these meetings, asked pointedly whether the board had been receiving any portion of Karen's illegal collections. During the federal investigation that followed, auditors discovered the full scope of Karen's operation. She had stolen over $15,000 through her fake fine scheme over 18 months, targeting elderly residents and newcomers who were less likely to challenge HOA authority. The real HOA bylaws contained nothing about package delivery restrictions, garden gnome limits, or most of the other violations Karen had invented. Karen had been printing fake violation notices on letterhead she created herself, using official-sounding language and legal references that meant nothing. She'd even created a fake community standards enforcement badge and title that had never been authorized by the board. Her entire authority had been an elaborate fiction, designed to intimidate residents into compliance and payment. Your stolen packages were returned along with dozens belonging to other neighbors who hadn't even realized they'd been victims. The investigation revealed that Karen had been selling stolen merchandise online for months, adding federal charges for trafficking stolen goods across state lines through internet commerce. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators found Karen's detailed records of neighborhood surveillance. She had been keeping files on every resident, noting their schedules, delivery patterns, and potential vulnerabilities, Mrs. Chen was marked as elderly. Pay is without question. The young couple was labeled new. Intimidated easily, you were noted as packages daily. Potential major fine source. Karen had turned HOA enforcement into a criminal enterprise with the cold calculation of a professional con artist. She'd studied her victims like a predator, identifying who would fight back and who would simply pay to make problems disappear. At Karen's federal sentencing hearing 6 months later, you testified about the impact of her crimes on community trust and security. Mail theft isn't just about stolen packages, you told Judge Harrison. It's about violating the fundamental trust that makes communities work. When residents can't even receive their mail safely in their own neighborhood, it destroys the foundation that allows neighbors to live peacefully together. Karen received 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised probation and full restitution to her victims. Her husband, who claimed complete ignorance of her crimes despite the stolen merchandise being sold under his name, quietly put their house up for sale and moved out of state before Karen's release. The house sold quickly to a young family with 2 small children who had no idea of its history. Sometimes justice means getting a fresh start with people who don't carry the baggage of past crimes. The Karen Pemberton case became a training example at the Postal Inspection Service for how mail theft can hide behind seemingly legitimate authority figures. Your former colleagues now use the case to teach new inspectors about recognizing fraud that disguises itself as official enforcement actions. But more importantly, the case transformed Willowbrook Commons from a neighborhood ruled by fear into a genuine community where neighbors actually looked out for each other. The new HOA board, led by Margaret Walsh with assistance from Mrs. Chen, implemented transparent financial reporting and eliminated the aggressive enforcement tactics that Karen had used to terrorize residents. Package theft dropped to 0 once word spread that a federal postal inspector lived on Maple Lane, but more than that, residents began watching out for each other's deliveries voluntarily. The young couple from Oak Street started collecting packages for elderly neighbors who weren't home. Mr. Morrison began keeping an eye on the whole street from his front porch swing, becoming an unofficial neighborhood watch coordinator. The fake violations disappeared entirely, replaced by actual community standards that residents voted on democratically. Garden gnomes were officially declared acceptable in any reasonable quantity. Package deliveries were recognized as a normal part of modern life. Even the community-approved package receptacle requirement was revealed as completely fabricated. Residents were free to receive mail however they chose. Your own retirement became much more peaceful once the criminal next door was removed from the equation. You went back to enjoying your woodworking hobby, ordering supplies without fear of theft or harassment. Your grandchildren's gifts arrived safely, and your prescription medications reached you without being stolen by someone who thought HOA authority trumped federal law. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's letting justice take its natural course. Karen thought she could abuse a position of trust to steal from neighbors who seemed powerless to fight back. What she never imagined was that the quiet retiree next door had spent 3 decades putting mail thieves exactly like her behind federal bars. The irony wasn't lost on you or your former colleagues. After 30 years of investigating mail crimes committed by strangers, your last case involved a criminal who lived 15 feet from your front door. But that's the thing about federal crimes. They're still federal crimes, no? Matter who commits them or where they happen. Have you ever dealt with an HOA board member who seemed drunk on power and made up rules as they went along? Share your story in the comments, because sometimes the people who abuse authority the most are the ones who least deserve to have it in the first place. And if you've ever had packages stolen, remember that mail theft is a federal crime no matter who's doing it, even if they're wearing an official-looking badge. Next week, we'll explore another HOA revenge story. They fined me for my garden. Too bad. I'm a lawyer who specializes in property rights because sometimes the best defense against neighborhood bullies is knowing exactly what they can and can't legally do to you. Remember, real authority comes from legitimate sources and follows proper procedures. When someone tries to intimidate you with fake rules and manufactured authority, sometimes the best response is to call their bluff with real knowledge and real power. Karen learned that lesson the hard way 18 months too late.